What is the best I quit or you're fired you ever seen? I watched a former owner scream at a part-time fry cook. As she was getting more and more in his face, he reached back and untied his apron, pulled it over his neck, and put it on hers. No words, just put the apron on her and walked out. One of the most boss moves I've seen in 30 plus years in the industry. Story 2. Worked overseas, and it was a known thing that you come over on a tourist visa and were allowed to work for about 2 months and then had to wait for your work visa to finish, which depends on how much wasta your company had. So generally 1 month of sitting in your apartment. We had a guy that something got messed up on the work visa, so he has to leave and come back on a new tourist visa, but can't work yet. That delay causes his fingerprints to expire, but no one can figure out how to get him new fingerprints. That delay brings him in line with Ramadan, so no government paperwork is being processed anymore. So he has to leave the country and come back again. All in all, he stayed in his company-furnished apartment for about 7 months, getting paid the whole time. He's finally able to come into work, and the first day he says, "You guys don't know what the duck you're doing. I quit." Frickin' legend. Story 3. A warehouse manager I know in a retail pickpack operation had a family member knocking on death's door around Christmas, so timing wasn't great. He asked for a week to say his goodbyes, as it was a 4-hour flight each way. They denied. He asked for 2 days, denied. He asked for 1 day to fly, in and back, denied. He cracked the craps, completely ducked the scanner's internal Wi-Fi network and pickpack system, threw his keys at the office, and walked out. What an exit. It screwed their operation for a few days. Story 4. I worked in a PC repair shop in the mid-90s owned by a guy whose own mother described him as tight as the paper on the wall. One Friday, when we all went to lunch to cash our paychecks, they bounced. The 5 of us had all gone to the same bank and watched each check bounce in turn, then went back to the office and told him he was going to fix this right now or he was not going to have employees anymore. He didn't fix it that day, but convinced us to stay, and we had fresh paychecks ready for us when we arrived on Monday, so we all immediately went to the bank on the clock, deposited them, and then quit en masse because the mother ducker had shown up to work that day in a brand new 80,000 BMW. Dude basically dipped into the payroll account to pay the down payment for his new car because he really wanted it that weekend to impress some woman or something, and we were just like, yeah, nah, this is never happening again because you don't have employees anymore. Story 5. Tech company decided to fire half the company via email. Probably should have confirmed one of my coworkers was in a sales meeting with the company's biggest client. The client loved her. She saw the email come through and stood up saying, "I'm so sorry, I was just fired." They called her the next day and offered her a job and fired the tech company for poor culture and management. Amazing. Luckily, I had quit the month before. I knew something was up. Story 6. It was my coworker's very last day bartending at a busy piano bar, and I had the honor to witness this. Middle-aged woman orders 2 fireballs, a Miller Lite, and a Shock Top. He pours the other stuff, then blows a keg and says, "I'm sorry we're out of Shock Top, but we have Blue Moon on tap or in the bottle." She's like, "Ugh, seriously, fine. I'll take Blue Moon, but I won't be paying for the shots." He pulls off his work t-shirt. He had an undershirt on, unfortunately. Looks her dead in the eye as he dumps the Miller Lite in the sink, then takes both shots of Fireball himself. Then he just walked out, leaving her stammering and leaving me across the bar in eternal awe. Story 7. An old boss lived 2 hours from work, so liked to leave the office by a certain time to miss traffic. Problem is she'd write the schedule so the relief person would literally be clocking in when she needs to leave. After clock in, it takes some time to get stations set up and take over, so every day she'd rant about how everyone needs to be here early and ready to go before they clock in. No one is doing work off the clock, so we suggested she just change the shift so the person arrives 15 minutes sooner. After the billionth day of her ranting, the relief person took off their badge and key and handed them over wordlessly before walking right back out. That was the person that closed the shop damn near every day. So for the next month, she had to do all closing shifts because no one else had the availability to wouldn't volunteer to help her. Story 8. Coworker was given 2 options to apologize for something that wasn't his fault. He said, "I choose C, duck off, points at project lead, you suck, points at another person. You're not as cool as you think. Another point is you're kidding yourself if you don't realize your wife is cheating on you. Points at me, I'll see you on World of Warcraft tonight." Tosses his badge behind him and walks out. I knew that he had been debating a job in Texas for a bit more money. He accepted the job on the drive home. We raided Ice Crown Citadel that night. Story 9. I worked at a nursing home that was good, except the kitchen manager was a huge a-hole. We'd go to him for food for a resident, and he'd duck with us. Waste our time. Flat out refuse. He ducked with us. But the end result is he actually ducked with our residents since it was their food he was messing up. Banana Head took a couple days off for a long weekend. While he was out, we got a new resident. Really old guy from Ukraine. Minimal English, super paranoid that the Russians were spying on him. Absolute total sweetie pie. Survivor of both the Holodomor He didn't like most of the food we served, and I couldn't blame him. It wasn't his culture, and also it's bland nursing home food. He would drink tea and eat one vanilla ice cream for breakfast. We all bonded with him pretty quickly. 4 days later, Banana Head Kitchen Banana comes back. We serve breakfast, but there's no tray for the new Ukrainian resident. Remember, this guy survived 2 genocide attempts, almost starved to death twice in his youth. We all felt awful that Banana Head hadn't prepped a tray. I went to get one, and Banana got refused, saying a diet slip hadn't been submitted. I got one if the nurse managers and Ducker still refused to make his meal. At this point, everyone is eating in the dining room, except our old fella. That's literally neglect. Illegal. Banana Head waited until he'd served literally every single other patient before he made this man his tray. Nurse managers told the administrator, and the administrator fired Banana Head by text message. We all rejoiced. Old fella died about a month later. Benji. Get ducked, Benji. You're a holes, and you were an a-hole to old people dependent on you. Story 10. Kids' first day at Best Buy. We're doing the agonizing opening hype-up routine where we all play volleyball with a giant beach ball over a customer stanchion to increase morale or something. This kid decides he's going to dive for the ball for some reason, and an eighth of weed falls out of his pocket. It lands right in the middle of everybody, including multiple managers. He picks it up and says, "Guess I'll just go smoke this," and walks out. 30 mins of employment total. Story 11. Me. Last Thursday. I took a job at a fine dining spot opening up by these 2 very talented chefs I used to work for a few years back. They had their own spot for the last 4 years that was just the 2 of them and a small serving staff. I was extremely excited to join them because it was a brand new kitchen, brand new equipment, and we were going to be using the freshest stuff along with top-tier ingredients. I'd be using tweezers more than tongs. It was an opportunity I've been waiting for to gain experience in that sort of environment. Fast forward 3 months, and I start to see just how bad of managers they are. They 86'd the entire front of house over text message, basically saying, "Because we can." They would have great weeks with us in the kitchen saying how proud of us they were, and how they've got the best kitchen crew in the city, then turn on a dime and decide we were all ducking up all the time, and we don't care, etc. Well, last Thursday was particularly bad. There had been tension building up over the last week, and none of us were sure why. Food was going out beautifully, ticket times were low, nothing was coming back, and prep was done well before service. The one chef comes in after a shopping trip and gives us a 20-minute talk about how the energy has been low in the kitchen, how they feel like we aren't excited to be there, and how we're letting food go out looking sloppy, literally the first time we were hearing any of this, and basically says, if this kitchen isn't right for you, then maybe you should put some thought into if you want to stay here. All of us are extremely confused by this as we thought and had been told we were doing great. Well, the other chef starts really digging into me the rest of the day, making crafty comments about questions I'm asking, and just being really ducking mean for no reason. It finally comes to a head when, during service, I tempt a fish and it was cold in the middle, but the outside was hot. I explained to the chef the thermos said it's 50 degrees in the middle. She tells me that's impossible because it's so hot she can't even touch it. She sends me home for the rest of the night to collect myself. The blinders I had up finally came off, and I realized it's going to be this big polar cycle forever there. I did some thinking when I got home and sent a text to the one chef saying, I did some reflecting on your speech earlier and I don't feel like I'm the right fit. They were already short-staffed to begin with, having not replaced the bartender they fired 3 weeks before that, so I know me leaving was a pretty hard blow. I only feel bad for my line boys though. No one deserves to be treated like crap. Story 12. My very first job was for a really crafty person. Racist, misogynist, creeper, just an all-around yucky old bigot at the precursor of the Up-S store. Like this pause would make us classify job applicants by race, by writing antiquated racist terms on their apps. He referred to his own workers in the store, even in front of customers, with racial slurs. He creeped on high school girls. He even would regularly call the cops on people that didn't speak English in the store, saying they were suspicious and aggressive individuals, or they were trying to steal crap, which was extra ridiculous because anything actually for sale was behind the counter. The front area was filled with printer copiers and free mailing supplies. Only a month or so into the job, I'd already had enough of dealing with that crap and didn't want to be the type of person that just went along with it as long as I get a paycheck. See also, was still a hopeful idealist kid. So basically, I was already looking for a way to get fired. I had recently gotten written up for insubordination for not doing some messed up thing I was told to do. So as punishment, it was my turn to do the stockroom inventory, which was down in the basement of the parking garage in a very hot room with zero ventilation. Turns out, though, that he stored the inventory for some of his illegal side businesses in there too, one of which was selling agricultural festival fireworks, illegal in my state. This included mortars, rockets, mateys, and 2 wagon wheels. Basically 10K plus firecrackers tied together to the same fuse and rolled into a giant wheel, a literal quarter-mile long when unrolled. So, naturally, I marked those supplies as empty, finished taking stock of everything else, then rigged the door to not actually lock on my way out. After my shift, I drove my car into the garage, told the garage attendant exactly why I was there. He hated that pose, too. Backed up to the storage room and loaded the trunk with way more explosives than a 16-year-old kid should ever have. A few days later, after a couple no-call, no-shows, boss had figured it out and called threatening to call the cops on me. I told him to go ahead. I'd be happy to turn in the $15K worth of illegal fireworks I found in his business's storeroom. I guess he didn't want to, so he fired me instead. Story 13. First, I loved my job. Second, I hated the people, mostly, that I had to work with. 22 years. Started as a draftsman on a table. Ended up building an entire AutoCAD system from scratch. Wrote user manuals, programmed tablets, was eventually handed all PCs in the company in about 300 worldwide. I built a batch file menu system that allowed users to do almost anything they needed for their jobs. I customized systems for accounting, engineering, drafting, etc. The owner's son, who managed a sales office out of state, showed up and ragged on my ass in a meeting for causing problems at the office he ran. It turned out they hadn't done any of the updates I sent for months and just installed the latest one, which was designed to build on previous updates. His father was there and got all over his ass about treating one of his employees badly. After the meeting, my manager said, "You have a target on your back." I did change the update method by adding a check for whether updates were current. If not, no update. Call me. Out of all the offices, his was the only one that did not install them when they were received. The last 3 years there, my responsibilities grew by leaps and bounds, and my raises were crap. I was slowly being given work that someone else had been doing for years. I heard later he had been whining about too much work for months. I talked with my manager every year, and the last conversation was me telling him what I expected for my raise that year. Of course, it did not come through. The morning after the letter informing me that my raise was, once again, crap. My manager came to my office to ask me a question. I handed him an envelope with his name on it. He looked at it and said one word, "Duck." I told him I had enough of being treated like crap and my hard work being ignored. I gave 2 weeks but left a day early because the owner wanted to have a dog and pony show. No thanks. I ended up starting a computer consulting business with me as the sole employee. Made damn good money and had a great boss. That Christmas, we were invited to my old manager's house. My replacement was there, and he asked if I really did everything they said. I told him yes, and to be careful. The owner's son had come back to the home office, and employees were dropping like files. I ran into the third in command from the accounting department at lunch in a place he would not have been normally. I asked what he was doing there, and he said that he and the two above him had quit the same day. When I asked why, he simply said the owner's son's name. He told me that a lot of longtime employees were bailing, and I found out later that the son, who was slated to run the company, was on the board of directors and would never run the company. Story 14. A story about a coworker at McDonald's. He was probably about 20 at the time. He was the only steady closer. He put in his 2 weeks and on his last night decided to trash the place. He brought in his baseball and wanted to see how many wall tiles he could break before getting in trouble. 4. I tried to punch through the metal baking trays. We had to order new ones. And stuck sliced cheese all over the walls. I don't think it was personal. I think he was just being a crazy, drugged-up 20-year-old. I got fired from a pizza delivery job. I was 19 on my way home from a mini vacation for a friend's wedding. The owner had someone else call me to fire me while pretending to be the owner. I could tell it wasn't him. After calling the store back several times to try and actually get the owner, I finally got a hold of him. I let him know that while I wasn't very well liked, I was one of the only few people that wasn't stealing from him. He told me I could save my job if I told him who and how, and I replied that he could go F himself. The guy that fired me blew up my phone freaking out, BC. He did it the most. Also, the owner totaled his new Maserati a few months later from drunk driving, so that was cool. I got a text from a friend that said he was paranoid and started putting cameras in his shop. Story 15. My old job was a huge company with a giant campus, with multiple buildings and a ton of outdoor seating for lunches. One older middle manager was a few months from retirement after spending his entire career with the company. He was an experienced climber, wanted to go out with a bang, and convinced another manager to help him. They used their access to get to the roof of a 9-story building, which was right beside the largest outdoor seating lunch area. Buddy manager handled the safety stuff from the top while he climbed down the building into the quad, where security was waiting to take him and tell him his retirement day was now today. Story 16. I saw a nursing unit manager write a 6-page email rant about how hopeless upper management are. Announced she was quitting, and this is her 4 weeks notice. Email sent at 7 a.m., email withdrawn by it by 7:30 a.m., not before dozens of people read it. All it accesses removed, and security escorted her from the hospital by 8 a.m. Her desk cleared out, and someone else sitting in her desk by 9 a.m. on a temporary roll. Interestingly enough, in 10 years, 12 people have done that job. Story 17. I got fired because one of the employees wanted to go to part-time, and the manager wanted me to pick up his hours as they would be understaffed. I said no, so they fired me, making them understaffed. Story 18. I had been complaining for months about the return to office push at my corporate job, where I was driving an hour each way, 5 days a week, to sit at a desk, calling and emailing people all around the world, talking to my colleagues in person for maybe 5 minutes a day. I loved the work, but the office was a place where joy went to die after WFH 100% during COVID. My complaints were completely ignored. I signed for another job the week of my yearly evaluation. I decided to hear them out first and sat through the eval with my team lead and our manager. They were very happy with my performance, gave me a stellar review, then went quiet when I asked one last time about the remote work policy. I told them I took another job and pulled my letter of resignation out of my pocket. Not the funniest one out there, but I'll always remember how good that moment felt. Story 19. Not exactly on the mark, but a guy in the same platoon as me in the Army had his last day fall on a PT test, physical fitness, and asked his squad leader, boss, if he had to show up to the test since it was his last day. Squad leader ran it up the chain of command, and someone decided yes, he had to be there. He showed up to the 5 a.m. PT test, and the first exercise is push-ups. In the Army, if you do less than 10 push-ups on a test, it doesn't count, and you have to do it again. He gets down and does exactly 10 push-ups, then gets up and walks away. Technically failing his PT test, but what are they going to do? At noon today, he isn't in the Army anymore. Story 20. I worked at a busy bar near Harvard that had a roof deck. We'd obviously get busier in the warmer months and would hire a lot of temporary staff, often students, to compensate. Many people did not stay long because our clientele was difficult to say the least. Best quitting story was during a weekday lunch shift, aka Harvard faculty on their break. New-ish girl takes a table of 15 middle-aged women. She is running ragged for drinks. They are talking down to her, and then taking their order took her almost 20 minutes, asking to split the cost of salads over many separate bills, etc. Right after or before they were done, who knows, she walked away, walked into the server station, took off her apron and said, "I need to go." Left, never called or came back. Best part was I got to go to the table and take their order at a second time. But we already gave our order to the other girl. Yeah, and she just quit. Not because of us, of course. Story 21. My cousin and a handful of his friends all worked at a Little Caesars. They all played on a highly competitive basketball team as well. So the first travel tournament came up, and the manager put my cousin on the weekend schedule. He said he couldn't make it because he was away, and he had already told the manager about it months before. Manager said, "All of you are at the same tournament, and someone has to work." So my cousin agreed to work. The day of the shift, the manager contacts my cousin and asks where he is. "On my way, be there as soon as I can." 30 minutes later, "Where are you?" "Be there in no time." Another hour later, "Where are you?" "If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm not going to be there. I quit." Story 22. This was actually in my final year of high school. I was in a common study area, doing my own thing while my friend was sitting quietly on the other end of the room. One of the newer teachers came in and scolded him. "Thomas, you're supposed to be in the detention room with the others." "No thanks, sir, I don't want to," he answered calmly, without even looking up at the teacher. "Well, it doesn't matter what you want. You have detention and you have to spend your free period in the detention room and do your homework." "I am doing my homework." Teacher was getting pissed. "Thomas, you better get up and come to the detention room or I'm going to call the principal." "Call him." "What?" "Call him. I'm not moving." With that, the teacher stormed out, swearing under his breath. Thomas continued working quietly like nothing had happened. 5 minutes or so go by and a very red-faced principal comes in. This was not the first clash of the week between these two. "Thomas!" Rage bubbled beneath the quiet name. "Mr. Jones is a teacher at the school and you owe him your respect." "I don't want to respect him." "Well, then you had better respect me." He raised his voice. "No thanks, sir." That was it. Principal snapped. "Thomas, you can either choose to start respecting your elders and go to the detention room, or you can choose the gate," he shouted. "Thanks, sir." Thomas started putting his things in his backpack calmly. "I'll choose the gate." Finished packing his bag, walked out the door, down the path, and out the front gate, and never came to class again. Studied at home, came in to write our ACE-level exams, got straight as a side from one subject, some of the highest grades in the class. Story 23. It was a bit of an urban legend at one place I worked, but there was some sales rep that was being an absolute tool to everyone. Just super toxic, but the director kept them around because they always hit their number. Fast forward, that director leaves, and the sales rep was still just being unbearable. The new director comes in and hears the stories, chats with the rep about it. Nothing changes. Maybe a month or so later, after a few more chats and coaching, the director says, "Hey, let's go to lunch and chat for a bit. I'll drive." The rep thinks he's going to a local steakhouse, which was customary for lunch meetings, but instead pulls up to a McDonald's and starts to get out. The rep looks confused, but the director is just like, "Oh no, you gotta check this place out." So I go in, wait in line, and when they get to the front, the director asks the cashier for an application. This was a whole ego, and they had paper application. Just hands it to the rep and says, "Here, I wanted to help you start your job search. You're fired." As I said, this was a bit of an urban legend in the office. No one could confirm it happening, and it's probably gotten more and more epic over the years, and I'm sure every workplace has this legend. But duck it. I choose to believe it. Story 24. In high school, I had told a coworker about how I tried to hard-boil eggs in the microwave and ended up with it exploding and egg everywhere when I was a kid. He remembered this story after getting fired, so went into the break and meeting room and filled our very quiet-sounding microwave with eggs right before the manager's meeting. We heard a boom, and the managers came running out covered in eggs. Some were laughing, others confused, the rest royally pissed off. He got banned from every Kmart for it, but still didn't regret doing it. Manager of our department fired him for having dirty times in the backroom storeroom. Story 25. I was about 3 months into this new job, and it's the guy who worked closest to me. Had been there like 9 years and was very highly paid, but also very good at the job. And one day just lost his mind and quit. Boss came up to me and goes, "Bet you didn't think you'd see that," and started to laugh. I asked what he was gonna do now, and he told me he quits at least once a year. He will take a week off and come back in like nothing has happened. I don't even bother paying out his benefits anymore because we both know what the deal is. Sure enough, the next Friday, I think because every Friday the boss bought everyone who was there burgers, chips for lunch, the dude was back at his bench, smiling away saying, "Yeah, I just needed a week off. He, the boss, gets it." Story 26. Didn't quit or get fired, but I worked at a pizza place. We had a fill-in lead from another store that didn't like me for whatever reason. She decided she wanted to put her own food into the oven without putting a ticket in or telling anyone right before the rush. So when her food came out of the oven, I obviously didn't know whose it was. So I put it on top of the oven so it was out of the way. As I'm cutting pizzas, she pushes me to the side, asks where her food was, and looks at me like I just committed a murder. I shrugged and moved back into place so I could continue working so we didn't get backed up. She saw it on top of the oven, grabbed me, whirled me around to face her while I had a sharp object in my hands and began screaming at me. As I started to tell her the S-rush was hitting and I didn't know whose it was, she told me to go home. I ignored her and went back to my job. She grabbed the knife from my hand because she's smart, nearly dropped it on herself, looked at me like I did it, and told me to get out. So I asked if she really wanted to be alone during dinner rush. She said she didn't care. So I walked out, called my actual lead, and told her what happened. Fill-in lead had the entire rest of the shift by herself, 5 p.m., 12 a.m., as no one would come in to help her after hearing what happened. Drivers also witnessed and backed me up because I was this sweet kid. Story 27. This guy had been in the company for 6 months, and so far, I'd yet to see him do anything. Most people take time to settle in, but this guy is still acting like it's day one. Never makes a decision, never around for the important parts, constantly answer obvious questions. It really seemed odd when he started to chase me on things that had nothing to do with me, or asking questions about his job. I mentioned it to another coworker and they told me he asked them the same questions just the week before. They had showed them how to do it. A month or so later, he is on his own. His boss is on holiday for the week, so nowhere to hide. The first day he calls in goes sick, says he will be back in a couple of days, but on Wednesday he calls up and isn't sure about coming back. He is told to come back or face a review. Comes back in on Friday, hides in the staff room all morning, then sneaks home early. While he is off, they look into it again. It turns out he lied massively on his CV, gave a fake reference, said he had years of experience, but doesn't know basic stuff. Monday comes, and the senior manager is in early. See the guy get to his desk, tells him, "Don't bother to turn on your PC, come and see me, please." 3 minutes later, he is walking out the door. Everyone tries to make their CV look good, but outright lying about major key skills is just bound to get you caught pretty soon. Story 28. Former student worked at a pizza place in a town with only 2 pizza places, gets into a slow burn fight with his boss, and decides to go nuclear. Orders pizza from the other place to be delivered to him at the desk while he's working. Kind of the most boss move I've ever heard of. Story 29. My former boss wrote me up on our last day of work. I have the summer off. And when we came back, he was terminated for harassment, voiding my write-up. Story 30. In college, I was a grill chef at the pool at a fancy country club. All members' daughters would flirt with me, and then the members would complain of staff, me, yucking it up with members. I was warned if I continued to fraternize with members, I'd be fired. With only 1 week left in summer, a girl was being extra flirty, and my manager warned me. So I took my shirt and pants off and dove in the pool with this girl. Proceeded to hang out as her guest for next 15 minutes until security came to escort me off premise. Story 31, our expo girl, 6 months pregnant, ordered food to take home after her shift. I guess she ordered a family meal off of the catering menu, like 80 full price. We obviously weren't allowed to use our full discount for those. She either didn't know or didn't care. She complained about how long her food was taking. Management saw that it was a catering order and immediately got on her about the discount. It became a whole argument. The manager said they'd have to refund the order and re-ring it to give her the right discount. She said she didn't want the food then and to just refund her. It was all made and being boxed up at this point. The manager said absolutely not, because then the food would essentially be wasted now that it had already been made and was sitting in the window. The expo girl walked up to the window and slid her arms straight across. Everything in the window hit the counter or the floor. She told the manager to duck off and walked out. It wasn't the best I quit. Certainly not the nicest, definitely the messiest, since us servers had to clean all of the broken glass and food up after. Management didn't lift a finger to help. Story 32. So I was pretty new to the company at the time. One of my colleagues one day just went cold towards me. I would make a comment here or there just to start some small chit-chat while we worked the front counter, but was ignored. I got jack of it and confronted them in front of our supervisor and asked them, "Do you have a problem with me?" Their response was childish and made it clear where I stood with them. The next day, our supervisor pulled me aside to ask if I had an issue with my colleague. I said no, but I felt like they have an issue with me. My supervisor then had the same conversation with my colleague and was told that he had smirk, like they had something to say. They proceeded to say they had another job lined up. My supervisor said that they would accept that as their resignation. Now, this is where it gets funny. The next, my colleague comes in to clarify that they actually had an interview lineup and that they did not have the job at that time. Supervisor apologized and said that they already accepted their resignation and needed it in writing by the end of the day. They played chicken and lost. Story 33. Guy tried to abuse a coworker while she was eating lunch in her car in the parking lot out front on his first day on the job. Fortunately, another coworker saw it go down, called for help, and we all dragged him into the back room and basically sat on him until the police showed up. Just as the police were perp walking him out of the office, my boss said, "Oh, and in case it wasn't clear, you are so fired." Story 34. I was dragged along with a promotional promise for about a year once. I was the only one that worked in the office 5 days a week for the role I was in and knew they would have trouble filling it. But after a year, I gave up and said, I really didn't want to continue doing it, and they said they couldn't promote me because I had behavioral issues which they'd never mentioned till this point. They said my only real choices were to deal with the job I had or quit. I replied, okay, they were very happy with themselves. I wrote and sent my resignation before they would have had time to even walk back to their PC from my area. Story 35. Manager of a resort crashed the company Land Rover into the owner's car and said, "Duck you." It was glorious. I was up on a veranda fixing a railing looking down at the whole scene. Dude made it to the bar before he was arrested. Owner was like, "You guys saw that, didn't you?" "Nope, we were working. Only heard it, sorry." Story 36. This must have been in the planning for a while, but in a former job, I had an IT manager who thought they knew everything when, in reality, they knew nothing. Out sysadmin was getting tired of being treated like crap, constantly thrown under the bus, impossible expectations, etc. Well, one day it happened. He just up and quit. What the manager didn't know is that the sysadmin had spent some time writing scripts, policies, etc., and hiding them in any nook and cranny he could in our domain, network. Nothing overly malicious or illegal, but passive-aggressive as hell, and only affected that manager. A few examples. Set a special password policy for the manager. He had to change his password every 2 weeks, change his background to something annoying like bright colors or a cartoon character, and rotated through it, randomized the location of his desktop icons weekly. Of course, since this manager believed in siloing, none of us were able to fix it. Okay, I'll admit we could, but due to the manager's policies and thoughts, we couldn't. I felt bad for the next sysadmin. They had to go through and find where this was done and undo it. Some of actions were set to go off months later. Story 37. A store manager for whom I worked took a drive with the regional boss, headed to another store in the city. About halfway there, the store manager handed his work keys to the regional, announced he quit, and kicked the regional out of his car. Story 38. I've seen a lot of pathetic ones, especially the attempts at quitting in an epic way. Worked retail, we hired your stereotypical schlubby incel type dude who would just complain to the other guys his age in the break room about how no woman wants to date him. I was friendly with these guys, and they would tell me that they tried to befriend him, but he was too depressing to be around. He got fired for not doing his job, and he made some half-assed attempts to be edgy over the intercom, basically stealing the bit from Family Guy. The best firing I've witnessed was at a restaurant. We hired an assistant manager who seemed okay at first, but she was a hot mess. She'd micromanage every server and host, pound through whatever candy the servers or bartenders would bring in until her stomach hurt, then turn around and police me about the sugar content in my electrolyte powder. She slept with and hit on bouncers, talk every single table's ear off, and the district managers surreptitiously demoted her and hired another manager to take her place. She was finally fired after telling a table, in the middle of their dinner, all about the abortion she had when she was younger, as well as getting caught on camera, giving a bouncer a BJ. I don't know why they let it go on so long. Story 39. I don't have the story anymore. It's not what happened, but how the story was told. Butchered version. Guy works at local wing joint, operated by a whole boss. Football game day, so it's going to be super busy. He's the only one that shows up. Way overworked, but does it anyway. Boss lets in friend who is sitting on counter and interfering with the process. He asks him to move. Boss yells at him. He says all of a sudden felt this intense level of calmness sweep over himself. Takes off apron, says enjoy game day, and walks out. What made it legendary is he goes home and tells his roommate, and they order a bunch of chicken from the same place just to give him more work. Final line was, wings were undercooked and oversauced, but I was just that right amount of salty. Story 40. In high school, I worked at a movie theater. One of the employees knocked on the office door, said, "I quit Karen," and threw their name tag and vest at the manager before walking out the exit. Beautiful. Story 41. I had an employee that was habitually late. I warned him that a major job started the next day and that if he was late, I would fire him. Well, he showed up late. As he walked in to give me his excuse, I loudly said, "You're fired. Pack your crap and get out of here." He stopped for a second, looked right at me and said, I came to tell you that I quit." Then he flicked on the TV in my office. Guess what showed up? The second plane hitting the tower. From later discussion, he was trying to tell me about it, and that's why he was late. But it was so unbelievable that it wouldn't have mattered until I saw it. I ended up sending everyone home 10 minutes later and canceled all jobs for the next few days. Story 42. Colleague had a meeting about his performance with leadership, as well as shifts scheduled for the rest of the week. Monday comes, meeting time comes. 15 minutes passed and a call is made. Boss, "Hey, where are you? We are waiting for you at my office. Ex-colleague EC. I'm not coming, I'm in Syria. Boss, what do you mean? I'm in Syria on vacation? Boss, what do you mean vacation? You haven't asked for time off and you're scheduled for the week. EK, well, I'm in Syria. What do you want me to do? Boss, you're gonna have to come back? This isn't okay. Eek, well, I'm on vacation in Syria and will first be back in 3 weeks. Boss, that's not okay. You can't just go on vacation without approval. This is a fire-able offense. Eek, well, I'm in Syria and not coming back before 3 weeks. Boss, I'll be forced to fire you then. Eek, cool. Guess I'll stay a little longer then. Officially, he was fired, but pretty sure he quit. Story 43. My personal favorite was watching our horrible micromanaging GM get absolutely ripped apart by our foreman. It was a construction company, and the foreman was the nicest, most easygoing guy you could imagine. The GM was an absolute banana head who micromanaged things to an insane level. It felt like we needed his permission to sneeze, or we'd get in trouble. After giving the GM an absolutely savage verbal lashing, he went back to his calm demeanor and said, "I'm sorry guys, you're great employees, but I can't work under this a hole anymore," before walking off and driving away. The GM looked absolutely shell-shocked, stuttered out, "Just finished the day," went back to his truck, and drove off. It worked out in the end because the owner was furious over losing one of his best foremen and heavily reprimanded the GM for his behavior. After that, the GM only showed up when it was absolutely necessary and mostly left people alone. It felt like one of those situations where someone finally stood up to him and he had no idea how to react. Story 44. I've seen both. Both were in a restaurant, different ones. New barman was hired, thought he was a big deal, behaved like he owned the place and did a piss-poor job. Boss tells him to cut the crap and focus. He's on thin ice. The guy talks back, "What are you gonna do? Fire me?" Well, yeah, he got fired on the spot. The other employees were laughing hard. No one stood up for him. He just looked down and got the duck out. Head cook, late pay. He asks every day for 5 days. "Where's my check?" "It's coming," says the boss. On the last day, the cook asks again just when service starts, the only time boss shows up. Boss snaps, "Just do your ducking work. I'm not paying you to nag me every day." The cook says, "Right, you simply don't pay me at all. See you when you get my check." And he gets his stuff, go back home. I was his only cook in the house now, not ready to take on a full service by myself. This was a crap show. Story 45. On my second sub, we had a minor flooding casualty while deep and fast and had to emergency blow. A small sight glass was exposed to sea pressure and should not have been. We took on a bunch of water really quick. We had to pull back into Hawaii for an investigation repair, and the captain kept everyone on the boat until we figured out what happened. We had a muster on the pier, and one new striker, non-rated deck div, complained out loud that it was dumb. We all had to be on the boat. The captain has just arrived and heard it. He yelled at the chief of the boat, "Cobb, get that guy off my boat. If he wants off the boat at a time like this, then he doesn't deserve to be on a submarine." Holy crap, best ever. I have no idea what happened to him. We never saw him again. I would assume he went to the surface fleet. Story 46. The place I worked at had the account for the biggest, most prestigious event in the state. If you were known as the official whatever of this event, it was a pretty big deal. The account was with one sailman, but ownership wanted to make it a house account. So the owner called up the director of the event and tried to convince her to make it a house account by telling lies and basically despairing the sailman. The event director was the sailman's mother. Different last names because she had remarried since his birth. She called him up and told him, "This is what your bosses are trying to do." He went to them and quit on the spot and said he would be using the account to get a new job, and the new place would now be the official whatever of the event. They tried to argue with him, and he revealed that they had just bad-mouthed him and lied about him to his mother. He was snapped up in a bidding war wound after that, and several of us, myself included, followed him to his new place because we knew the client and work and could make it an easy transition. Story 47. This did happen to me this week. A warehouse manager terminated a forklift operator a few days ago. Incredibly toxic attitude, lots of unprofessional conduct, was killing team morale, etc. Figured the conversation was going to be unpleasant, which it was, but I had a full water bottle thrown at me, which missed not by much. But the funniest part, as he's cussing me out and I'm guiding him towards the exit, there's 2 sets of glass doors at the front. In the small vestibule between them sits a black trash can full of sidewalk salt. Been there for years, but several years ago I contracted out the salting, and they bring their own. So that salt has been sitting there for a long time untouched. Anyway, the guy throws the lid off and dumps over the 30-gallon trash can, which is like 80 while full. Except to his surprise, all the salt left had formed into like one giant block, and only a few crystals came trickling out onto the floor. We locked eyes for a second, and then he just left. Story 48. This girl, Erin, only at my company as in-between job and was there for a month. Her parting gift? Report the company to the Department of Labor for unfair labor practices and no HR. Then, she was gone like a whisper. Damn girl. Story 49. Not me, but my dad's coworker. He was at Burger King one afternoon for lunch, and an employee and the manager were arguing. Manager accused the employee of being late, apparently not for the first time, and the employee continuously denied it. Employee then said, "Karen, tell me I was late one more time." Manager said, "You were late." The employee then attacked her. As the fight escalated, another employee asked my dad's coworker for help. For reference, he was one of the only customers there, and he's a pretty big guy who's former military. He jumped over the counter and started trying to pull the 2 women apart. He managed to pull the manager off the employee, but she couldn't completely disentangle herself. The employee shouted, "Karen, let go of me," to which the manager said, "I can't, my finger's caught in your weave." I don't know for sure what happened next, but I assume the employee was promptly fired. What a way to exit. Story 50. After I realized that my employer was gaslighting me into believing that I was going to get promoted and lied to me about other things, I nodded to them, took my backpack, and went home. I decided that I wasn't going to work there anymore, huge weight off of my shoulders, but didn't tell them for a whole week. I received great pleasure in the amount of text messages and phone calls from management, and the owners saying how much they appreciated me as an employee and offering me a chance to have dinner with the owners to clear up any misunderstanding. After my week off, I called them and bluntly told them that I was quitting and wanted to pick up my final check that day. It was also great to find out that the dirtbag that was gaslighting ended up covering my shifts with the new hire that was very lazy. The company now no longer exists. Story 51. I worked with an older lady at a restaurant in her 50s. She dropped a large bag full of smaller plastic bags of presumably substances on the floor right in front of our boss. Our boss picked it up, and the lady plucked it out of her hand and walked right out of the front door, never to be seen again. Story 52. Back in high school, I worked for a larger movie theater chain. I was one of the best salesmen, popcorn buckets and upsells, and never call out of work. I got a couple of my friends' jobs there as they were equally as hardworking. One of the friends requested off the whole day for his graduation party. The day of the party, the only 2 people scheduled open-close is the other friend and me. It really felt targeted, and I was done with it. Normally on these days, we'd only be scheduled AP4 or 4 Clau. So I mixed up all the change in my drawer and made sure bills all went different direction. Called a manager out, clocked out, and waited for them to turn the corner. Made eye contact and said, "I quit on the radio." Took off my work shirt and spun it around as I left. Story 53. I was getting great reviews for years. They got better and better every year, but not quite good enough to get a promotion. Just do a little bit more and you'll get it. My numbers were excellent. I was trusted to train all the new managers. Over my week-long PTO, the manager rankings got leaked. They ranked me 1 of 5. When I came back, I laid into my boss in front of all his managers, calling him a snake and two-faced. As he tried mumbling an excuse, I cut him off by sliding my resignation across the table and walked out. I didn't tell anyone that I'd accepted another job, hence the reason for my week-long PTO. I hope the drama of the resignation still haunts him. Story 54. A good friend wanted to go to the beach for the day, but was scheduled to work a shift at the grocery store we all worked at. He said, "Let's flip a coin, heads. We go to the beach, tails, I go to work." He flipped heads and said, "Guess I'm quitting that job," but never actually called out or anything, just no-showed. At the time, he had already been working for a construction company on the side, so he had a plan to go full-time. About a week later, he was back at the grocery store to buy some stuff, and a manager approached him to ask what was going on. He told them, "Oh yeah, I quit this place a week ago," and laughed. It all worked out well for him. Still works for the construction company nearly 20 years later and is very high-ranking. Story 55. Worked in a grocery store. One of the guys, GF, came to the store. They went on break to his car. He was getting a BJ in the parking lot out front during store hours. Customer sees this, asks to see the manager, Karen. So the manager goes out there and watches up until dude opens his eyes. Yes, he stood there and watched him get a BJ. Gets told to come inside by the manager, not the GF. He comes in and grabs his crap from his locker and ducks off. Best you're fired I have ever been witness to. Story 56. I like mine. Tried to blame me at work for being on duty while I was on a vacation day with the appropriate paperwork in my hand. Big investigation, and they can't be convinced to go away. Consequences were a fortitude of a day's pay. I've been in the Army 20 years. I'm pensionable. Put in my paperwork and their subject matter expert left. Don't duck with the guy whose mortgage is paid off. I'm not American. Advice for Americans, don't join a military that doesn't let you quit when you need to. I make more money now and get to sleep in my own bed every night. I'm much happier. Story 57. My boss had a meeting with the team and some of my teammates started asking hard questions, etc., as the company just announced it was going through a bankruptcy and giving very patronizing answers. At one point he said, "I'll tell you this, if you don't like it, then quit. But good luck getting a job out there." Me, who hadn't said a word up till this point, stood up, threw my badge on the table and said, "I quit," walked out and never came back. Coworkers told me later that he just sat there stunned in disbelief as they all awkwardly got up and walked out of the meeting. Story 58. About 20 years ago, I opened my email to see an email from someone at HQ 5 states away who I didn't know. It was a screed about getting those Mexican mother duckers out of America, and it had been sent to all users, which was about 4,000 people. Apparently, she had mistakenly sent it to all users when she had meant to send it to a tight group of 5 people she was friends with. Not that it makes it any better, but talk about a blaze of ducking glory. She lasts 5 minutes. The amount of complaints that flooded in prompted HR to send out a mass email telling us it was unacceptable, and she was terminated immediately. I have no doubt she blamed the Mexicans for that too. Story 59. At a .com I worked at in the early 00s, there were layoffs. One laid-off person sent an email to the every employee worldwide email address, chiding the multi-billionaire founder to cash in some of those billions and buy yourself a soul. It was brutal. Story 60. Guy at a pizza place I used to deliver for answered phones and took orders without putting them into the system. He then quietly left us to figure out why people were calling about not getting their orders and what is the pettiest thing you've seen someone fired for. I actually was fired yesterday from my pizzeria after 5 years because I asked for 2 days off for a family event and a surprise day with my girlfriend, obviously just said family event. I came back every summer from school and they would ask me if I could come back and help. I always did because I love the customers. After I was told no, I ended up trying to switch with someone else, like we normally would do. My boss found out, didn't like it, and fired me after 5 years. Kinda dumbfounded, to be honest. Story 2. I was dismissed from a firm after 2 days because the guy who hired me didn't like the hockey team shirt I had on. Ended up taking the firm to court and won a large settlement. Stupid kid. He ended up getting fired, saw on his LinkedIn page. Story 3. 2 girls on the very low end of the totem pole, like not even making a living wage, servicing position. One is a spiteful Karen who barely does her job and takes too many days off. We'll call her Tiffany. One is a really sweet hard worker. We'll call her Mary. Tiffany and her best friend coworker Stephanie are constantly talking crap about Mary, causing drama that keeps trickling up to middle management. One day, Mary's in the bathroom in a stall and overhears the other 2 talking crap about her behind her back again. She ends up in her manager's office in tears. It goes up the ladder to the owners. The owners decide that this needs to stop, and the best way to do that, they fire Mary. Story 4. Working in the hell known as a call center in West Mifflin, PA. Saw one woman working, not feeling well. Had no time left, so couldn't call off. Within a few hours, she had used up all of her allotted break time, 15 minutes, and her supervisor wouldn't permit her to leave the floor for the bathroom again. So she threw up all over her computer. She was fired for destruction of company property. True story. Story 5. One of my coworkers went on vacation and her flight back was delayed, making her late for work when she eventually got back. They essentially forced her to put in her 2 weeks on the spot. A week later, when she was too upset to go to her goodbye lunch held by her boss, she was told that day was her last day for not being a team player. Story 6. I saw someone get fired because they had alcohol at work. It was a gift from a vendor, and they just had it in their drawer still sealed. All our sales team would receive wine, beer, liquor as gifts from vendors, and some had it displayed in their office. Obviously, they just didn't like this person. Story 7. I was fired because I was bringing the moral of the team down by taking 1.5-hour lunches every day. Okay, except that I was taking longer lunches to take my son to a medical treatment he was going through at the time. That was well agreed with my boss beforehand. I was coming in an hour earlier every day to compensate, as agreed. However, I'm glad to be honest. My boss was a huge douche with no leadership skills or a clear vision of the project. Story 8. I was fired from Subway when I was 9. The dressings and sauces come in these big plastic bags, which you cut a small hole in and pour into the bottles. When you're done, you put the bag and its remnants in the fridge for the next fill-up. One day before my shift, the owner brought me in the office and him and his brother had 3 half-full bags of dressing. They asked me if I threw them away, instead of putting them back in the fridge. I said no, he no clue who it was. TBH. They kept accusing me of it and said we could watch the tapes to find out. So I said fine, watch the tapes. They had no tapes. They kept persisting that I did it, and when I finally just said I don't know who it was, but my shift is starting, they said they needed to know if any more bags were thrown away because they were taking it out of my check. I told them you're not doing that. They told me to leave my shirt and apron, and I was being terminated. I went home and told my dad, whose first response was, they fished through the trash for these bags and are going to serve it to the customers? So he called them and threatened to contact the Board of Health. They apologized profusely, and I went the next day and got my last check. I'm 90% sure in Massachusetts, to terminate someone, you have to hand them their final paycheck at the moment of termination. Either way, Duck Subway Story 9. I used to work at a Chili's restaurant, and we used to have to roll silverware after each shift. 50 silverware rolled in napkins. No one liked to do it. Well, one day, all of the servers got called into the dry storage area. The manager had found a tray of silverware that someone had hidden so we wouldn't have to roll any. I forget what the ultimatum was, but the manager was going to take it out on all of us if someone didn't confess. Finally, one guy stepped forward. I still don't think he did it, but he took the blame and was promptly fired. Story 10. Guy got fired BC. He finally got his degree in engineering and wanted more responsibility and pay. Managers threw him in a role purposely built for him to fail without support and training. They gave him neither. Fired him when crap spiraled out of control. Caused a rift between the team and management. Over half of the team left within a year, including me. Story 11. I had worked as a leasing consultant for a very well-known apartment rental company 12 years ago. My schedule start time changed daily, weekly, and it was not uncommon to work 9 days in a row, so it could be exhausting. The office switched to using a fingerprint punch and clock when you start your shift, and if you missed it, you had to fill out a time card sheet. So I missed a punch in one morning and filled out a sheet a few days later. I wrote my start time as 8 o'clock, but it was really 9 o'clock. So the assistant manager called me, asking about it the day before we put in our time cards for pay. And I said my mistake, it was in fact 9. Let me know if you need me to come into the office and correct it. She said, no problem. 2 hours later, she calls me again, but sounds strange and asks why I wrote down 8 o'clock. I said I was confused because the rest of the week had been 8 o'clock, but again, no problem if you need me to correct. I was told, no, that is fine. Turns out, the manager was on the other line, who hated me, and they tried to get me to say something that would fire me. I did not, however, I was fired for trying to steal 1 hour of pay. After I got fired, I filed for unemployment and actually got it because when the unemployment office called the manager to get her story, she never returned the call. Jumped to me at a new job 2 months later, and I get a court notice that my old boss and company is taking me to unemployment insurance court because they want to dispute the 1 month I collected unemployment. So I go and they have a corporate lawyer, the HR person, the assistant manager, and manager against me. We sit in front of a judge who hears our case and I provide my side of the story showing how much the start times change, etc. They provide their side and the judge goes, okay, so the employee was fired for taking 1 extra hour of pay. I interject and say, Your Honor, I never received the pay for that hour. He asks, what do I mean? I tell him the problem was caught before the timesheets went in. He rubs his face and says, so why are we even here? My old boss says because he tried to steal an hour. The judge goes, I heard enough. You will get my judgment via letter. This session is over. He ruled in my favor, so I got to keep that 1 month of pay and the money they wasted on the lawyer, the HR women, and getting people to cover that property while the managers had to go to court probably cost more than the money they were fighting me for. Haha, duck them. Story 2. Oh, I have another one. This was a buddy of mine, incredibly talented software developer, but a bit of a joker. My boss, who was way too serious, did not like him too much because of that. So we have been asking for a few months for a code repository because we had to work with shared folders, and as any developer will tell you, that is an absolutely garbage idea. Before a particular part of the project, this buddy of mine took him upon himself to create and configure the repository on a machine that we used for backup. It took him about an hour, which was on his lunchtime, not on company time. And from then on, we had a proper development environment with SVN. He was fired for insubordination, for doing something beneficial to the company and crucial to the project, on his own time. Story 13 happened to me in an internship. You talked to my wife yesterday? She said you're cute. Get your stuff and duck off. Well, okay, I'm 20 and your wife is like 50, but more free time until summer holidays end. Not going to argue with you. Story 14. Had a friend who worked for a steel fabricators as an apprentice. However, he had decided that he was better suited to a future in the Navy. He had been given a start date for basic training, and around 2 months before, he had to hit the emergency stop button on his steel press because it had loaded in the steel incorrectly. That's why the emergency stop button exists. Afterwards, he would have to take some time out to reset the machine and record the incident. Anyway, someone had blabbed to his management that he was leaving to go join the Navy a few months later. So they sacked him for what they found was a disregard for personal safety because he had to stop his machine. Story 15. A friend of mine was sacked for misuse of its services. I assumed this meant watching adult film at work. Turns out he was applying for other jobs and he'd browsed a few news articles. He explained to me that a lot of his colleagues would be going out for 20-minute cigarette breaks, and being a non-smoker, he'd use that time to browse the internet for a few minutes. But someone ratted him out. I thought at most something like this might warrant a disciplinary meeting. Definitely didn't think it would be worth firing someone over. Story 16. About 14 years ago, I was working at a local grocery chain when I joined the military. I worked there while awaiting processing. The manager of grocery store had printed the schedule for the week, and I had just gotten my MEP's information, and it conflicted with my scheduled time to work. I informed the manager that I couldn't come in as I was going to take my test, do my physical, and swear in. So after I came home from that 2-day ordeal, I had a message on my answering machine that I was fired for failing to show up. Fortunately for me, my recruiter was amazing, called him up and reamed his ass out. Story 17, myself. I had worked there for a while, and finally the parent company started moving in and taking over. I was staunchly against the change since I spent hundreds of hours rebuilding their IT infrastructure from scratch, only to have it ripped out and replaced with stuff I was untrained on. The actual infraction was pretty laughable. A boss was with some employees at a bar after work. Apparently she got in a fight with one of the employees, fired her, and confiscated her laptop. She gave it to the other employee and told him to use it to work from home the next day. Of course, that didn't work. He didn't even have rights on the VPN. She called me into her office to berate me because my technology didn't do what she thought it did. I was sick of kowtowing and just straight up told her she can't reassign hardware without clearing it with me. I was her peer in the org chart. It wasn't insubordinance. Still, I got fired for not fixing a problem I didn't know existed. Story 18. Not switching gloves when switching from the big burger patties to the small ones. He was fired for cross-contaminating. The patties came from the same manufacturer and packager, same ingredients and everything, just different sizes. Story 19. I work in it, and I had a contract job that was going to end on Friday. On Thursday evening, I decided to clean up my computer profile, transfer relevant documents to our network share, and use CCleaner to wipe my internet cookies, etc., history, standard protocol. I pretty much just wanted my PC fresh for the new guy. Boss walked in the room when I walked away for a bathroom break. When I returned to my desk, the laptop was gone. I was told to see the boss about it. He accused me of deleting company data and wiping my computer. He wasn't very tech savvy. I explained to him what I was actually doing and even showed him the important docs on the shared drive, which he cared about. He didn't apologize, but still insisted he didn't trust me anymore and that I should leave. I happily left smiling because the next day, Friday, I knew I was supposed to train the new guy on becoming the new ServiceNow administrator. My boss forgot this while we discussed, and they ended up getting screwed since no knowledge transfer was ever made possible. I heard they paid a lot of money for someone else to come in and basically figure out what I had done. To be fair, they offered me a good amount of money to come back for 2 days of retraining, but I told them no as I already had another job lined up that following Monday. I hope this story qualifies for this topic, but I thought I'd share it. Story 20. My husband was asked to do an interview to go from temp to full-time. A couple of his coworkers got jealous. They trashed his equipment while he was on break. The whole thing was caught on camera, but they still fired him for not being a team player. Story 21. I was let go after 2 years for not being a cultural fit for the company. I worked in the accounting department. This came after I had a big deadline coming up, and I opted to stay behind and work rather than going to a coworker's birthday lunch. My supervisor forced me to go anyway, which took 2 hours, and I was unable to meet my deadline. A few weeks later, I transferred someone over to their correct associate in the department, and she started screaming at me in front of her supervisor and my supervisor, telling me I wasn't a team player, that I should have taken the call even though it wasn't my region. After that, the same morning, the department manager calls me in and says, "It just seems like you put your work before people. Therefore, we don't feel like you're a cultural fit." She literally meant because I opted to work as opposed to socializing that I was being let go. Oh, but they still wanted me to stick around to finish the financial quarter to help keep their numbers up. I agreed under the condition I get my full bonus for that quarter. Story 22. Really not petty, but wanted to share. A guy interning at Chrysler used to schedule 4-hour meetings in parts of the building where people never go and take naps. Story 23. It was my coworker. First, a little background. This place was a crap show. We usually worked an extra 3/5/8 or overtime for free a day. We got sick of it and demanded we get proper pay for our work. While administration was working it out, they told us to stop working overtime. They drilled it into our heads: when it's time to leave, leave. Drop what you're doing and go home. Fast forward a week, it was 10 min after our shift ends, and this one guy walks in and asks for a tour. Now, we never seen this guy before, but we know he doesn't work here. It's a small place. So my coworker politely declines, explains that we're closed, and offers a tour tomorrow. This guy goes ape crap and storms off. The next day, the head guy in waiting for us to show up, and he fires my coworker on the spot. Turns out that random guy was a high-paying donor and practically paid for the building. We didn't know that. The guy never said that from our POV. This random guy came in and wanted a tour. Happens more often than you'd think. Coworker didn't get a chance to explain himself. Just fired. I quit shortly after. Story 24. My friend got his shifts covered. At his sub didn't show one day, and he got fired via text on vacation. He was unfired but lost all his shifts and is now a sub. Story 25. Worked in a warehouse with a conveyor belt system. This college-aged girl working one of the lines made a design out of Post-it notes on the side of the belt. A supervisor saw it and lost his crap. If you have enough time to do that, you could have done more work. They didn't know who did it, so they called everyone into a big meeting. 40-50 people in a 15-minute meeting, trying to find out who did it. Well, here comes in Jason, who rats her out. Jason is the type of person to see 2 people talking and report them on the spot. Duck people like that. She got suspended for a week. Came back and worked 1 day before being fired half an hour before the end of the shift. I don't like Jason. Story 26. I got fired once for calling in sick. I called in to tell my boss that I was too sick to work, so she had me calling around to find a replacement. No one answered, but I was sick, so I called her back and told her. She said, okay. I show up the next day, I had work, and everything is fine. She doesn't say anything. 2 weeks later, we get the schedule, and I'm not on it. She's not in because she's on vacation, so I ask her assistant. She has no idea and tells me to just wait for the manager to come back. Being a dumb 19-year-old, I do. So another 2 weeks later, I'm still not on schedule, and she's back but avoiding. Like if I ask for her, no one can find her. Finally, she got sick of avoiding me a couple days later and gives me a meeting with her and the store manager. I'm fired for no call, no show. I ask her what the duck she's talking about, and she says I haven't shown up for a month of work. I tell the store manager that I wasn't scheduled, and I could tell it threw him off a bit. But the manager keeps insisting I just didn't show and that I need to sign this paper saying I'm fired for not showing. Ultimately, I did because, again, dumb-year-old. I found out later from a friend that worked in a different department she did this because that day I called in sick. She had to work on her day off. She ducked me out of a job because she had to work on her day off as a manager. Story 27. I worked in a bar when I was 19, and they told me to go home and not come back tomorrow because I didn't ask for a guy's ID before giving him his second beer. I assumed someone had already checked if he was asking me for another Heineken. Also, dude was at least 50, grizzled old biker type with a scraggly gray beard. Story 28. My ex got fired because of mayonnaise. She was a middle management type at our local NPR station, had been there for a few years. New station manager got hired, and the guy hated mayonnaise, viscerally. He banned it from the employee refrigerator. She had a mini fridge in her office, so everybody started storing their mayo in there. He saw it one day during a meeting in her office, started screaming at her, accusing her of belittling him, and fired her on the spot. She was well compensated in arbitration, but she still lost her dream job. All the same. Story 29. The assistant manager at a movie theater I worked at in high school would steal things constantly. I mean, entire boxes of toilet paper. And when he was in charge, all of our registers were always short every damn shift. He was also just a horrible person in general. We eventually all told the regional manager separately about it because the current manager was not going to do anything about it. People came in to question us about him. He eventually got fired because he took a bottled water, drank it, filled it back up with tap water, and put it back into the fridge to sell to customers. It was the only thing they could pin on him. At least he was gone. Story 30. A guy I know worked at a factory and came in while he was off the clock to talk to a coworker of his. He made the mistake of wearing a wife beater, which showed his array of tattoos covering his body, so he got fired the next day for making the company look unprofessional. Story 31. Years ago, I was fired from Pizza Hut. I was a shift manager, and there was really bad tornado activity one night. An employee was freaking out because we're from the Midwest, and she lost her friend to a tornado recently. I called the store manager, and she said to close and go take shelter. Luckily, my house had a basement and was a few blocks away. 30 minutes later, sirens stopped and we went back. Trees were uprooted all over the road, and glass was broken near the drive-through window. We were soaking wet from the rain. When we got back, online orders had been coming through like crazy, and there were only 3 of us. My server was shivering, and I told her she could change into basketball shorts that were in her car. Anyone from the Midwest knows after tornadoes, everyone goes out to look at the damage. We got slammed, and to make matters worse, a man gave us 10-minute notice that there would be a party of 30 coming. This was a Monday night with 3 employees. We spent hours after close trying to get caught up, but finally left. Next day, I get a phone call from the store manager, and I come in and she says she had no control over this, and she was going to have to let me go because she received 2 calls about a server wearing shorts and not black pants. I explained the situation and she started crying, saying it was over her head. Plot twist. I later figured out the real reason I was let go was because I reported an incident to district manager involving an employee throwing a metal crock pot full of ranch at an angry customer. It missed the customer, but I had to clean it, and the customer was upset, and the employee was sleeping with the store manager that fired me. Store manager was later terminated for having relations with this employee in the office while on the clock, and also stealing thousands of dollars over the years. Story 32. I was working at a resort on a ski mountain, and one of my coworkers was getting married. He reserved and prepaid for the honeymoon suite for the night of the wedding itself. His plans was to stay the one night there and head to the airport the next morning to fly out on their honeymoon. He made his reservation over a year in advance. He checked it 6 months out, and again 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, 2 weeks, week before, and the night before. Everything seemed to be good until he arrived with his bride. That afternoon, some people from out of town had arrived and asked to be lodged in the honeymoon suite. The front desk clerk declined, citing that it was already reserved. The owners wound up getting involved and conceded to move the existing reservation and put the newcomers in the honeymoon suite because they were willing to pay an extra $50 premium. When my friend arrived and found out they were expected, with no refund or employee discount, to stay in a different room, he was notably upset. He complained to the workers before having the owner summoned. By the time she showed up, he was beyond anger, and while he worked the role of an upset customer, the harshest language was saying this was an unacceptable way to run any reputable business. Eventually, and I don't know the details of the deal, they wound up in another room. After they went to their room, the owner went to the kitchen and demanded the chef fire my friend. There was no good way to contact him on his honeymoon, and the head chef had to just write him off the schedule and wait until he came back. I rode up with him when he got back. He had a closed door session with the head chef and came back out the 2 car. I probably should have expected that. The place got sold out to a chain and closed down within a year or 2 anyway. So he doesn't have too many hard feelings, but he is watching the obituaries and planning a party when the owner finally dies. Story 33. A supervisor who had worked here for 5 years mentioned in his end-of-shift report that 2 forklift drivers had called in and he had to unload a truck himself. Turns out his forklift certification had expired a couple weeks ago and he was terminated for driving a forklift without certification. The real reason is because he had not gotten a promotion he thought he deserved. The person who did became house boss and was coming in every day with a really crafty attitude and trying to undermine his boss. So she was looking for any excuse to fire him. Story 34. Singing. I worked at a pizza place and my coworkers and I all hated the assistant store manager for a wide variety of reasons. One day she was making us move all of the equipment to clean under it, which we did 2 or 3 days ago as part of a monthly cleaning. She did this for no better reason than making us do miserable stuff. So we decided to sing songs in slow rhythm like miners or slaves used to do. She came out and yelled at us to stop. We started humming it. When she yelled at us for that, we started to whistle. And when we started our second song whistling, she stormed out, grabbed the first employee she saw, and fired him on the spot. Story 35. I don't know about petty, but this is funny. A guy I worked with applied for a new job while on company time. A few minutes later, he got an out-of-office reply from the person he sent his resume to. It was our boss, who was out of town, but had posted a job opening to eventually replace the guy who was looking for a new job. Story 36. When I was hired at a library, they told me they were willing to work with me with regards to my class schedule, even when I told them it would be different the following semester, fall semester. I had no classes on Wednesdays, spring semester. I had some that prevented me from working Wednesdays. Well, they decided that they really needed me to work Wednesdays, even though I worked there with my sister and she was willing to trade days, but that wouldn't work. They told me I could either put in my 1-week notice or they would schedule me on a Wednesday. They knew I couldn't work and I would be fired for not showing up. My 1-week notice was a piece of paper where I wrote, "Boss's name told me to quit, so here we go." I'm pretty sure they hired me and my sister to act as the scapegoats for every issue the library was facing, so they could save their own jobs. About 2 or 3 years ago, a new city manager decided to personally audit every aspect of his city. When he met the ladies in charge of that library and the library systems for the city, he immediately fired them both. At a different job, it was incredibly slow on like a Monday or Tuesday or something. Our expo was in college too and needed some time to study for a test. Since it was insanely slow, he spoke with the floor manager who said he could leave if everyone in the kitchen was okay with it. We were all cool with it, so he left. Then it got a little busy, but literally nothing we couldn't handle. Next day, he calls me and says he got fired. The floor manager lied to our head chef and said he just walked out on the job without talking to him right as it got busy. That guy still works at that restaurant as a floor manager, never worked his way up the ladder. The head chef is off somewhere else, but I don't give a crap because she was a terrible human being. Story 37. I used to work at a nameless children's pizza and arcade chain, whose mascot was a giant dancing mouse. I had a coworker get fired for cussing at management. I was friends with both him and the two managers, so I was able to get both sides of the story. The managers told me that after he had clocked out for the day, one of them asked him to go bus tables. He refused as he had already been allowed to clock out, and she told him to do it anyways. So rightfully annoyed, he said, "Well, what the duck else can I help you with?" Now, this does sound bad at first, except for the fact that we would all cuss at each other. I've had one of them tell me to do something and responded, "Duck you, Karen," and they just laughed, and I went and did it. So cussing at management is a bullcrap excuse. From his side of the story, which I'd also seen happen to him firsthand, they were very rude to him due to him being autistic. He handed doctor's notes as well as notes from his sponsor from a mental health support group he attended saying that he couldn't get into the mouse suit and do the dance because it could cause him to have a seizure. Knowing this, they would schedule him to do the shows anyways, and there was an argument about this almost every day. And they used to take breaks to come and chat with me at my post by the door and complain to me about how they didn't think he was actually autistic and make other complaints about him going so far as to tell me not to chat with him and yelling at him for distracting me when he would pass by me and say hello. Story 38. My husband was fired for succeeding. He was working a job that he genuinely loved for a boss that cared about her employees. Her bosses, however, were terrible, and she quit a few months into my husband's tenure with the company. She warned her staff that things might not go well, but they figured she just meant that they wouldn't be as nice as she was. It became immediately clear that the higher-ups wanted to force her entire team out through intimidation, overworking, and just being difficult in general. When that wasn't working, they sat my husband down and told him that they need an absurd amount of work done in a very small amount of time, like an unreasonable deadline. There was no way he could complete it. He worked overtime for free to get it done. He was hitting himself over it. Because of his extra work, it started to look like he could actually do 3 months worth of work in the few weeks he'd been given. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of forcing him to not succeed. But then 2 weeks before the deadline, despite his progress, they brought him in, said, "It doesn't look like you'll meet the goal, so you're fired." We're pretty sure they were going to wait until the deadline, but my husband's inhuman work rate forced them to pull the trigger early to not even give him the chance. He was on unemployment for less than a month before securing a better paying job, but that didn't stop them from trying to argue it in court. This was another mistake, since my husband had previously worked for DCFs and had lots of experience in court. They were very incompetent, and when the judge learned, they fired him for not meeting an obviously impossible deadline. Before that day even happened, he pretty much ended the proceedings and granted in my husband's favor. He was pissed they wasted his time on such an obvious ploy to fire a hard worker. Every time we drive by his old building, we flip them off, told her. Husband was too hard a worker when company was desperate to clean house. Judge was exasperated at their stupidity. Story 39. I was once fired from a job because I was asked to create this bullcrap intake form on Microsoft Word and my boss claimed that I didn't do it. I was genuinely confused, and even though I was 1,000,000% certain that I indeed sent it properly, I said, maybe I forgot to attach the file. Boss said we can't have that kind of forgetfulness here, and told me to go clean out my desk. As I'm cleaning things out, I open my email, pull up the original sent email that included the file he claimed I never sent, and forwarded the original email and reattached the same file. I included the date in the file name too, to the boss who just fired me. I forgot exactly what I wrote, but it was something along the lines of, "Thank you for the opportunity. Here's the file you requested." As I'm cleaning out my desk, the assistant director, who was so busy in his own work that he didn't notice I was being fired at that very moment, confusedly asks, "Whoa, Milkerson, why did you send us the same file twice?" I didn't know whether to facepalm or explode in a fit of rage. Story 40. My fiance wasn't fired, but he was forced to resign due to his micromanaging Karen of a boss. She would chastise him for going 1 minute over his scheduled break and demanded that should he need to use the bathroom, he'd tell someone up at the desk, where he didn't work, that he was going, just so they could clock how long it took him to crap. Eventually, he told her that he couldn't go into one section of the building because the carpet was moldy underneath and he has asthma. She did not believe there was mold, even though other employees had reported trouble breathing in the area. He would struggle to breathe there. She demanded he get a note from a doctor even though he couldn't afford insurance. The free clinic didn't do doctor's notes, and it would take weeks to see a specialist. He couldn't get the note. After coming in the next day and seeing that his boss had left work for him to do in the section, he couldn't breathe in and chastised him for not spotting a pencil on a bottom shelf when cleaning up the public area. He was forced to resign. He was there for 6 years. After they lost him, his Karen bosses had trouble keeping other employees. I wonder why. Also, the place is getting recarpeted after 20 years, but only after my fiancé left though. How nice. It is now 14 months since then, and he is still looking for a job with no luck. I hope that Karen gets her comeuppance one day. Story 41. This happened about 14 years ago, but back when I was a practicing Catholic, I worked in the church nursery taking care of kids. Paid way above minimum wage, we were able to choose our hours, and essentially just sat there watching Disney movies with the kids. Anyways, I was asked to play Pontius Pilate in the Easter play for the church. Me being selected as the guy who eventually sentenced Jesus to death is telling. So we had rehearsals. I was scheduled to work for an hour before the play, and the Catholic rules at the time required 2 workers since no should be left alone with 1 adult. The chick I was working with apparently had back issues that day. Really, she was just a lazy pause that eventually got hooked on Met, and I had to leave about 10 minutes early for rehearsal. The chick told me that she couldn't hold the kid, so I should take him back to his mom. This chick was about 3-4 years older than me, so I listened as she was essentially a higher up in the nursery. The mom told my boss, who fired me for not doing my job. I also got fired from a local toy store that had a rule that you couldn't lean against the front desk to give your feet a rest, and I called out the manager for physically sitting on the desk after she yelled at me for leaning. Story 42. I worked at a bookstore that had a cafe in it. We all got free coffee in the beginning. Then as the company started to fail, they took that away, and we had to pay like 40 cents and also for the milk in our coffee. The top brass came down hard one day and questioned everyone on if they paid for the milk in their coffee. Everyone didn't, but said they did, except one honest fellow. He was an exchange student from China and was the nicest kid you'd ever meet, worked really hard, and they fired him on the spot for stealing milk. It was over our boss's head, and everyone was so upset. Story 43. I am biased because it was me, but I was fired, though they consented to unemployment payments, because a newish coworker, 4 months versus my 4 years, didn't like me. Just that. Didn't think I was friendly. I barely interacted with her, never came to blows with her. She was just a squeaky wheel, read intimidating, and went to management a number of times to oust me. It was emphasized to me what a great job I did, how knowledgeable I am on my way out the door. My boss cried and has wanted me back. The wheel became manager of the company a year later, above others who'd been there for years. Oh, and they have cycled through 8 people to replace me. I am a woman. Everyone in my industry title companies is. Just for info, story 44. I was once fired for refusing to come into work at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night, on my off week on the on-call rotation. I was also drunk at the time and couldn't safely drive to work. Story 45. A former employer once terminated me 7 business days after putting in my 2-week notice and asked that I work until that Friday, the duck out on the spot. Story 46. I was fired for not wanting to date my boss. We got drunk at the Christmas party, and she decided that I was hot. So at the party, we made out and I took her home. She mentioned as we were getting there that she would only hook up with me if this was going to be more than a one-night stand. I said no, sorry, and that was that. I went home for a couple weeks, Christmas break in uni, which I had told her to book off months before. I came back and my friend, who was the manager below her, said that I was fired because I didn't show up for my shifts. The Karen booked me the whole time I was gone and never called me to tell me I was fired. Gotta love Pizza Hut politics. Story 47. One of my dad's coworkers took a 2-week vacation, scheduled it all out. The company has people bid for their vacation based on seniority every November. So it's not like he just took off at random. When the coworker didn't come back after the first week, his manager thought he was skipping work and fired him after he didn't show up for 5 days in a row. He showed up when he was actually scheduled to work after his vacation was over, and the manager got a wrist slap and had a nightmare of paperwork to deal with reinstating the guy, who went on to steal a truckload of computers several years later and get fired for real. Story 48. Years ago, I was working for a popular cafe near my house. I worked the front counter, and once a week I was responsible for making sandwiches that the customers ordered. After about 2 months there, I came down with a nasty flu. I couldn't stop throwing up. In retrospect, I probably should have gone to the hospital, but I was 21 and stupid. I called in sick for 3 days in a row and had to put the phone down each time to puke. I woke up on day 3 to a voicemail telling me that it wasn't working out and don't come back in. Where I live, either the employer or the employee can terminate the job without notice in the first 90 days of employment. So they did that. When I collected my final paycheck, they told me that they let me go because I didn't seem like I wanted to work in a coffee shop for the rest of my life. I responded, "Who the duck does?" and left. Story 49. So this actually happened to me. I worked for this restaurant as a bar manager for 3 years and was given the opportunity to help be an opening manager for their new location that was double the money of the first location. After being there for 8 months, my replacement at the other store was pregnant and about to go on maternity leave. So the owners conspired and decided to write me up 3 times in one day. 2 of them were that my bartenders didn't label the pickles. The other was some generic labor percentages were too high, which was overhiring on their part for opening a business in the summer. Anyway, they told me I'm fired from the new location, but they will offer me my job back at the old one after I had already moved out there, which was an additional 30 minutes. I told them to duck off. Former employees later told me they didn't want to hire another manager and waste money training them BC of the pregnant chick and decided it would be easier to make me go back. Let's just say they suffered story 50. In the 80s, I worked at a grocery called Schnucks. Management was obsessed with shrink and became crazy with employees eating damages or anything in the bakery. Some guy was fired for eating a few M&Ms from the cookie area. Another was fired for eating an old glazed donut. Instead of quitting with notice to leave for college or whatever, people started eating donuts in front of management and being fired on the spot. Quitting became eating the donut. Story 51. Only time I've ever been fired was as a cashier for poor performance immediately following my return to work after being out for 2 months due to a really bad car wreck where I busted my face up pretty bad and fractured one of my wrists. I returned to work as soon as I could after getting my cast off and being cleared by the doctor. But after being back for about 2 weeks, management decided to sit me down and tell me about the new policies they'd implemented regarding numbers, store head memberships, and credit cards we were required to upsell, which they failed to tell me about at any time during those first 2 weeks of being back. They then gave me 1 week, which was maybe 2 or 3 short shifts to get my numbers up, which I did, but not enough apparently, so they fired me when I showed up for my next shift. Pretty sure they were just looking for a reason to get rid of me since I didn't look like the rest of the people that worked there. Story 52. My sister got fired from a restaurant because she didn't smile enough. To be fair, she doesn't smile a lot and it runs in our family. We're all stone-faced while working but are very efficient, which the restaurant industry ducking needs sometimes. She told me that it was just a lame excuse they could think up because she was the only person who wouldn't let the boss do body shots off of her at the staff party a couple nights prior. It was a fine dining restaurant, and this crap still happens. Story 53. A former boss of mine tried to get me fired when I turned down his advances. I mean, I was flattered, but I'm married and a man and not gay. Story 54. It's not one thing, but this fits. I had a job where we had a district manager that would sweep through on occasion. We knew that his appearance meant people were going to be unemployed. If he couldn't find a legit reason, he'd literally make one up because you can't do anything about it in this state. He'd come in for a week or 2 at a time, and it always meant no less than 5 people would be fired. He'd call someone in, they'd leave his office, and walk right on out the door, and this manager would head off to the bathroom and stay there a good long while. Every single time. He managed to do this for 2 years before the corporate office started asking questions about why his district had a 94% firing rate. Almost no one quit this job because he'd fire you first. They eventually let him go when he couldn't produce a real reason for this. Story 55. Because I couldn't prove I didn't do something. Boss claimed that I hit a wall with a fork truck, which I didn't. Had no proof and only a scratch on the wall that didn't match with the truck I used. But because I had no proof that I didn't do it, my union didn't back me. It's the main reason I will never be in a union again. Doesn't do any good. What's the best way you've seen someone get fired or quit? Story 1. I used to work at an extremely busy Jimmy John's. We had this new guy, and he was still learning how to work on the line. During a particularly busy lunch rush, he was stationed on the same line as our GM and another veteran employee who was a total Karen to him. The Karen girl was getting really frustrated with how slow he was the whole rush and making a lot of rude comments to him. At first, he just gave her a little crap back, and then got back to work. About halfway through the rush, and she says something to the effect of, "We could go faster without you." This guy extremely calmly takes off his apron, folds it nicely, sets it on the cutting boards, grabs the mayo spatula, sprays the Karen lady's face with a huge glob of mayo, walks over to the pose, clocks out, pushes through the customers in line, and walks out the front door, never to be seen again. 10:10 exit. Didn't say a word the whole time, and the restaurant froze for about 30 seconds while it was happening. Story 2. Personal story here. Worked at Sears back during my undergrad years, trying to earn enough money to finish up undergrad. Sold shoes on commission, between 7% and 10% of sales, depending on the type of shoe, and was making pretty good money, 25 per hour, by busting my ass. They were always trying to screw us in little ways, lowering the commission rate on certain shoes without telling us, forcing us to stay after closing, unpaid to clean up, etc. But I was earning enough to put up with it. Then, right before back-to-school season, one of the busiest times of the year, they announced that instead of our 7% to 10% commission rate, they were going to switch us over to minimum wage plus percent commission. I was distinctly not thrilled by this news and made my displeasure known, but we had two options: accept it or quit. Store manager sits me down asking me to stay because I'm his top seller and do a ton of extra work to keep things running smoothly, saying that I'll still make good money through back-to-school season. I heard him out, asked for a pen and paper, and then did some math. Under the new pay system, if I had my best sales day ever every day, I'd still be making 40%, 50% less than I did on an average day under the old commission system. I looked the store manager in the eye and asked if he'd stay if they cut his pay 50%. He said he wouldn't. I stood up, shook his hand, let him know that I appreciated him talking things out with me and that I understood it wasn't his decision, and gave my notice. Story 3, working at a car dealership. There was this salesman, 60-ish, nice enough guy, but something just seemed off about him. Good employee, always showed up on time, did his job, kept his sales numbers decent, never gave management anything to complain about. One day he went up to the manager's desk and asked if he could leave for a while. Said he had a doctor's appointment, and he mistakenly wrote it in his planner for the next week, but it was actually that day. He wasn't the type to pull attendance shenanigans, so sure, the manager let him go. 15 minutes later, a bounty hunter showed up looking for him. The guy was carrying a full set of shackles, cuffs, leg irons, the whole 9 yards, accompanied by a state trooper. We told him the dude he was looking for claimed he had a doctor's appointment and had just split. He left a business card in case we heard anything and then left. Salesman who took off was driving one of our used cars from the lot when he left. We never heard from him again. We reported the car stolen. 5 days later, we got a call from the state police in the next state over. They found our car abandoned in a Walmart parking lot, undamaged, with the keys in the ignition. We never did hear from that guy again, and to this day, I can't find any arrest records or details about him. I figure he was using a stolen identity. And that's the best way I've seen someone quit a job. Story 4. Very religious dude went on a massive rant to me in the office. Being gay is a sin. Everything you do is a sin and you're going to hell. You're an abomination, things like that. Well, it turned out my manager, who happened to practice that exact same religion, was directly behind me and stood up, shouted, "Get the duck out," and frog marched him to the security booth and fired him there and then. Manager came back and said, "Sorry about that, we're not all bananas." That was about 7 years ago. A year ago, I started working in a new office for a different company. And guess who was there? That's right, him. I tried to avoid him, for obvious reasons. But one day he clocked me and said, "I used to work with you, didn't I, back at E, right?" "Yeah, we did." "Those guys were a holes. They fired me for no good reason." "Actually, they fired you because you made horrifically homophobic remarks to me." He turned white as a sheet and walked away. He quit a few days later. Story 5 was in a Starbucks. Some lady complained about her frap. The guy just said, "I had enough of your crap. It's been over a year, and every time we remake your frap," and he grabbed it, threw it at her feet, and just walked off. Story 6. In high school, I worked at a movie theater, and a guy I went to school with also worked there. One day, he was let go from his seasonal position after having been told he'd be staying on permanently by the GM. He got really upset in the middle of the main lobby, threw his hands up in the air, screamed, "This is horse crap," and walked over to the candy jars, where people would make these self-serve candy by the LB bags. He opened up the jar with gummy worms, put a couple of fists full into his pockets, and stormed out while throwing his bow tie into the air. Story 7. Walked into a Jimmy John's and all the employees were dancing on tables and the counters to very loud metal. Manager walked in pissed out of her mind and fired the shift leader, I think, on the spot. I just stood there watching for probably 5 minutes. Don't even remember if I ordered anything. Weird story I don't think about often. Story 8. Worked in a burger and wing bar in college. If you were good with the kitchen staff, you could get pretty much anything you could imagine for dinner for the cost of the cheapest thing on the menu. Had to ring in something at % to keep the boss happy. So it was normal for servers to come in with crazy ideas, and we'd make them. I was kitchen staff. Anyways, I was working a slow day, and one of the bartenders brings me a pitcher of beer and a request for dinner. Bribes always work, and it's not like he was paying for the beer anyways. It was like a double burger with a steak quesadilla for a bun, triple bacon, onion rings, and some other crazy toppings. Weird part was the sauce. He wanted the entire thing covered in the special house Git sauce, like poured over the completed burger. I laugh, accept my beer bribe, and make 2. Hey, I'm hungry too. So I plate them, tell the other kitchen guys I'm taking my dinner break, and bring them out. I sit down and start eating. Bartender takes his massive burger and throws it at the restaurant manager and says, "I quit," then downs a shot and walks out. The sauce-covered quesadilla burger was ducking amazing, but the evil glare from the head boss, while I was trying to eat a copy of what had just been thrown at him, was making it hard to finish. But I did. It was a great ducking burger. To this day, I still have no idea why he didn't just ask for a bowl of sauce to throw at the manager. I've always figured he just wanted it to cost a decent bit. Story 9. I didn't witness it firsthand, but it's the ducking dumbest out of a sitcom crap I've ever heard of. Coworker gets wind that his boss is unhappy with him and he might be fired soon. Builds up his confidence and goes into the boss's office to straighten everything out. I guess he lost his composure because the talk quickly deteriorated from adult conversation to "duck you, you're a ducking me, I hate you, everyone hates you, duck you, I'm out." The boss asks what brought this on. "You were going to fire me." "I was." "You weren't." No." "I see, well, can I stay then?" So story 10. I can tell you the worst way I've experienced. My boss asked me to get a file off of my coworker's computer. I was unable to retrieve the file because of the piles and piles of adult film she had saved throughout her computer, including photos she took of herself in the office bathroom. Those scarred me. I still haven't recovered. I basically told my boss I think he had better look for the file himself and see if he has any better luck. All I hear from her cubicle is his horrified shouts, "No! Oh no! Oh, not that! Is that my bathroom?" Needless to say, she didn't have a fun meeting with him when she got back from lunch. Story 11. I used to work at a McDonald's. I was there for 4 years as a manager working at an owner-operator system, not corporate. Thanksgiving morning, we were open for breakfast only and began closing around 10:30 a.m., usual breakfast end time. One of my fellow managers left her phone out by the drive-through runner station. Now, since it was a holiday and we were closing early, lots of crew were acting out and having fun, which our owner encouraged as long as we were still being professional, appropriate, and serving guests first. One of the crew members grabbed the phone, and unfortunately, the dot station was not covered in any of the camera's views. So we didn't catch the culprit. We chalked it up to a git named Keith, but couldn't actually prove anything. Fast forward a few months, and Keith is having bowel issues. As the shift manager, I keep having to find someone to cover him because it seems like every 20 or so minutes, he runs to the restroom for at least 10 minutes. After an hour and 3 bathroom trips, I'm ready to send this guy home. I go back to the office where my support managers are. One is the owner's son, the other is the manager who lost her phone, and the third is actually the shift manager for breakfast, and let them know. It feels like simultaneously they all yell at me not to let him leave. Okay, strange. The owner's son has been on the phone all morning with my support, the one who lost her phone, in the office with him. Turns out they have the phone company on the line and are trying to find out who has been using it. I'm absolutely completely unsure how they found out, but Keith did take the phone and has been using it ever since. Now, this git hasn't used the bathroom in about 30 minutes and is begging me to let him go. I tell him that I need to get some people back from break before I have a replacement for him. A few minutes later, max of 5 minutes, I get another crew member to cover for him. Keith runs to the bathroom and is in there for 10 minutes again. He waddles up to me, absolutely reeking of wet crap, and tells me that he didn't make it in time. I can't let this guy walk around in crap, let alone where we make food, so I send him home. Shuffling his way to the back to grab his stuff from the crew room, the owner's son and my support manager call him into the office. Accusing Keith of stealing the manager's phone, the owner's son fires him. This guy was just fired from a McDonald's right after he crapped himself. Story 12. A coworker went on a rant at my manager in front of customers, shouted at her and called her a cupcake, Jabba the Hutt-looking mother ducker. He then was promptly fired and left. Story 13. I was working for my dad about 10 years ago, and my best friend was working at this pizza place that treated him like crap. So my friend asks my father for a job, but my father tells him he will only give him a job if he goes into the pizza place and tells the manager he is an a-hole. I went with him to confirm. It was hilarious, and I worked with him for about a year after that. Story 14. I don't really think this is the best way, but it is one of the more memorable ones. Years ago when I worked at Disneyland, the night crew of one of the roller coasters decided to take a last ride after the park closed. They went out without the lap bars down, and one of the track turns is close to a walkway where they were visible. A park security guard saw them all standing up in the train and called Theme Park 1, the park manager on duty that night, to report it. A day or two later, everyone on the crew, including the lead who dispatched the train without the lap bars down, was fired. The union couldn't do anything to help them because they all clearly violated safety protocol. One team member ultimately got his job back because records proved he had gone home early that night and was off property when the incident happened. He wasn't allowed to go back to that ride, but he didn't care because he was a river guy anyway. Damn good guy too, so I was happy he got his job back. In case anyone wonders, this was in the 1990s, and after closing rides and such were common, provided we weren't being unsafe. On some rides, we'd have to tag out, take a tag to indicate we were somewhere inside the ride, and it was unsafe to operate at the moment. But as long as a lead, manager, or someone from maintenance knew we were there, things were fine. I have a lot of pictures from the times I went through the rides after closing. Such fun memories. Now, with all of the safety concerns, I doubt it would ever be allowed. Story 15. A mid-sized company where I worked had started out small, just about 15 employees on site, and another 20 or so in a recently acquired location in another state. When I started, policies were pretty lax. Vacation time was plentiful, perks were arranged. The CFO would steal the skateboard out from under my desk and skate through the office. After about a year, policies tightened up. Skateboarding in the office was a no-no, by anyone, even the CFO. Vacation time was cut. We acquired another company. We remodeled the office. A couple years after that, we moved to a bigger office. And a year or so later, the not-so-small company was purchased in June or July by a much larger company. By that November, the new management was scheduling all employees for either group meetings or individual meetings with the new directors. And by then, we all knew what was coming. If you were scheduled for an individual meeting, you'd better have your desk packed up ahead of time. If you were scheduled for a group meeting, you were in for God only knows how much misery. While processes changed, management changed, rules and policies changed. Again, the week these meetings were being scheduled, I was in the process of moving closer to the office, into an apartment with one of my coworkers. I'd taken a night job near the office, but that meant I didn't get home till after midnight, or to bed until 1 a.m., and was back up at 5 a.m. to make it to work by 8:30 a.m. I had to leave the house before 6 just to make it on time. I'd begun to pack my desk on a Friday, the day they scheduled my individual meeting. My coworker asked, "Are you still planning to move in?" He too was scheduled for an individual meeting, half an hour after mine. When I got to work on Monday, several of my coworkers were walking out, boxes in hand. We hugged and promised to stay in touch. When I got to my desk, I packed the last few of my belongings, with my boss next to me telling me, "You don't know what's going to happen. Why don't you log in and do some work?" I scoffed and waited for my appointment. The skateboarding CFO poked his head around my desk and waited for me to stand up. "Hi, woman of Eld, how are you?" He looked hangdog and sounded genuinely sad. His whole day was going to be people yelling at him, begging him, crying. I looked him in the eye, grinned at him, and said cheerily, "Well, CFO, I gotta tell you, this is the best day of my life." The CFO looked shocked, but crap. 5 years of working my tail off for no respect and no appreciation, and I get to go home at 9:30 a.m. with 3 whole months of pay? Yeah, you bet. That was the best day of my life. The last thing I put in my box was my skateboard. Story 16. So we had a dude who kept showing up to work high as duck every single shift. This dude was not smart at all and was trying to hide it, despite being textbook stoned, laughing randomly, red eyes, looking like a ducking space cadet. It wouldn't normally be a problem because if we can't notice it, we don't substances test, so who cares? But this dude just wasn't doing his job at all. My boss decided he was going to try and use scare tactics to get him to stop coming to work stoned, or he was trying to get him to admit it so we could fire him on the spot. My boss was not a serious guy and was really just doing it to see what the kid would say. He brought him into his office with a witness present, sat him down and began gazing intently at him over the desk. The kid starts sweating bullets. Then he leans across the desk and says, "Are you high?" The kid immediately starts babbling that no way, he's not high. My boss cut him off and yelled, "You're a liar." Then follows up with, "If you show up to work again high, you're fired. Now get out of my office." The kid scurries away like a puppy with his tail between his legs. Raucous laughter ensues. The kid stopped showing up after that and was fired anyway. Story 17. I used to work at a pizza shop, and Delivery drivers were always coming/going. Anyways, one day, we had a driver named Ivan who was a bullcrap artist and very lazy during the notoriously busy Friday night shift. Ivan leaves with about 100 worth of food and is gone for a while. Orders start stacking up and people are looking for their deliveries. Manager calls Ivan to see where he is, and Ivan replies he decided to take the food to a friend's house and wouldn't be coming back. He stated that the crafty food and cash he had would be sufficient enough compensation. Manager calls owner, who ducking hits the roof. Came in and had murder in his eye. About a week later, Ivan shows up wanting his job back. Almost saw a murder that day. Story 18. Our production manager brought in a 12-pack of Natty Boh and slammed all of them as quick as he could right on the production floor. Then he said he quits and walks out the door. I wasn't even sure if he was drunk yet. It was incredible to watch. Story 19. So, the summer after I graduated from high school, I worked at a pretzel maker at the local mall. It was a pretty cool job, got free pretzels whenever I wanted, and got to go shopping before work, after and on breaks if I felt like it. So anyways, the only downside was that I had to work with crafty kids who were still in school and only cared about high school and drama and blah blah blah. And I was always the kind of person to avoid such annoyances and unnecessary drama, mostly due to the fact that my family caused plenty of that crap already. But to the point, out of all these annoying kids I worked with, there was one guy in particular that would not leave me alone. He was a junior in high school, typical duck boy type who vaped, smoked, drank. He was quite the troublemaker. I honestly don't know how he managed to keep that job for however many years that he did. So he would do the typical immature things you'd expect from a schoolyard bully. He'd make fun of me, throw raw dough at me. He even threw a knife at me at one point. Now, he was a banana head to everybody, but he was especially banana-ish to me. I would always let my supervisors and the manager know whenever serious things happened. I would even ask to be scheduled on days that he didn't work so I could keep the job and stay safe. And then he was put up for the position of being a new supervisor, and he got it in a heartbeat. So now he had even more power. He started showing up late or not showing up at all. He got into a couple car accidents and a few fights. He would blast Eminem on the speaker in our store and scream the lyrics at me and my coworkers. He pushed and pushed to get reactions out of people. He made a lot of the girls at work cry. He tested the limits so far that I thought it would never stop. I had been looking for other jobs, but there was no place that would hire me, despite my efforts to look like the best employee in the world. I had no choice. I had to bear with it and hope that maybe someday our manager would grow some tits and fire this a hole. The tension just kept building and building. So many of us reported him so many times for being rude and inappropriate and threatening. And then the most satisfying workday of my life finally came. The manager had finally has enough, and when the banana hole tried to fake sick to not have to come in, she fired him over the phone right then and there. Sure, there could have been a more vengeful or justice-fueled way to fire him, especially if it wouldn't have taken way longer than it should have. But for me anyway, I felt a whole lot safer after he got fired. Story 20. Personal experience, also female. Intended misleading handle. I worked a couple months as a bartender at a local joint that was very popular. The creepy male owner hired me on the spot and handed me papers that stated that the dress code was skin, sex. Heels with a minimum of 3 inches had to be worn for every 8-hour shift, which you wouldn't think is too bad until you're walking around this huge bar serving people, stocking cases of beer and completely spot cleaning the entire bar every night. Skirts and shorts only with low-cut shirts. I'm typically the conservative type, so I didn't intend on going back, but before I left, I conversed with one of the bartenders, and she told me she made nearly $200 a night on top of the hourly $10 pay. Because of it, and I really needed funds, I gave it a shot. First day, I wore a shirt with no cleavage showing. She cut my shirt. Didn't even ask, just grabbed some scissors, walked toward me, asking if I'd read the dress code. When she asked if I wanted to work or go home, grabbed my shirt and snip. I was too startled to even react at this point. The money was just as great as I was told, but the majority of the guests were huge perverts, and the manager never backed the bartender, only his customers, even if they got handsy. He sat on one corner of the bar every day, got crap-faced, and made degrading comments whenever you were near him, so I did multiple absolute best to avoid him. His wife was a huge Karen, and measured the liquor count every night, making us pay for any shortages out of pocket, even if pourers were faulty. One night I was getting supplies from the storage room, and the husband stumbled in, locking the door behind him. "Where are you gonna run to now?" he asked with his junk and his Speedo. He wore this and a tank top when we were closing, and his wife went home early. I told him that if he didn't move out of the way, I was going to puncture a hole in his balls with my stilettos. He threatened to fire me, and I told him he'd be doing me a favor. He started laughing and let me pass, saying I should lighten up. I went to work the next day with the intention of walking out, spoke with the other 3 bartenders on shift, telling them what happened, and they shared equally disturbing stories. We all decided to wait until peak time and walk out at the same time without a word on a Saturday night during a huge event, and we did just that. I later found out that he was a registered offender and had over 20 counts of harassment charges and 2 abuse charges. But his brother was a lawyer and his family had government ties.